Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. At 16 years old, Mitarashi Anko was one of only 2 village pariahs in Konoha no Sato, or village hidden among leaves. As she walked down a semi-deserted street, she heard yet another villager call her a whore before leaving with a sneer on their face. This wasn't anything new to her. Every day she was called a whore, a monster, or a traitor because her ex-master, Orochimaru, had chosen to flee the village and become a missing nin. Most days she wished he had taken her with him, while on others she simply loved scaring the villagers and playing up to their thoughts of her. She wore a surprisingly soft black, custom-made, metal mesh body glove, which left nothing to the imagination, a tan mini skirt, which bordered on indecent, and a tan trench coat, which reached her feet and barely covered her large. She wore no bra and didn't even bother to shut her coat as she walked down one of the many streets of Konoha. Her purple hair was flipped up in the back and held with a metal band. She also wore her Hitai-8, which showed that she was a shinobi of Konoha, proudly across her forehead. Aside from this, she only wore a pair of silver metal shin guards and a pair of black combat boots. All in all, her appearance led people to believe she really was a whore even when she had done nothing to earn the title. As yet another person glared at her before walking away, she couldn't help but let her mask fall for a split second. Ever since Orochimaru had been discovered doing inhuman experiments on other people, he had fled and left young Anko to face the village by herself, and even though she was loyal to Konoha, everyone hated her and simply waited for that traitor's whore to flee the village like her master had done. So to make it through the day, she was forced to wear a fake smile as she walked through the village. The only real smile she ever offered was when she scared the villagers badly enough, or the sadistic smirk she often wore during the times she was called in to work on a friend of the villages. Unlike the second pariah, Anko was a full-trained shinobi and held the title of Tokubetsu Junin, Special Junin, for her skills in torture, interrogation, and poison use, so most of the villagers were too scared to ever try to attack her. The very few times they had tried, she had killed. Many of them were killed because Mitarashi Anko is a sadist and enjoys inflicting pain on others and messing with their minds, while still others were killed for something they said or done during the fight. Most of the shinobi believe that this is her way of getting back at the villagers for treating her the way they do, while still others simply believe she is crazy as hell. Anko herself is inclined to believe that both sides are right. Let it not be said that those skills were the only thing keeping the villagers at bay. Everyone knew that she was also a combat specialist who was very well versed in different types of snake jutsus. Sadly, unlike Anko, the second pariah was little more than a small 4-year-old boy who had no means of defending himself. As Anko walked towards the center of the village, Uzumaki Naruto ran for his life as yet another mob of shinobi and villagers chased him down. Naruto was very small for his age, from living on the streets his entire life and only eating what others would throw away. His once bright blonde hair was matted with mud and dried blood from a previous beating that he had yet to wash out, and his bright blue eyes that should have shone with a childlike glee only showed just how lonely he really was. His small bloodied feet left small patches of blood on the ground as he ran because he had never owned a pair of shoes in his life. He wore a very large shirt that was so mangled and torn that it gave Anko a run for her money on how much skin it showed. He also wore a pair of ripped shorts that were tied around his tiny waist with a long piece of rope. His only possession in the world was clutched in his right hand as he tried to outrun the angry mob. This possession meant the world to Naruto. It was a badly ripped teddy bear he had found in someone's trash. This bear was his only friend and companion. It never beat him or called him names, and for that Naruto loved it. Most parents wouldn't let their children within 20 feet of the thing as it smelled worse than anyone could possibly believe and held all sorts of bugs and mold, yet still Naruto held onto it with everything he had. As his tiny legs began to tire, Naruto felt a sharp pain as a villager reached out, grabbed hold of his hair, and snapped his head back with a hard yank. "I've got you now, you little shit," shouted the villager before he smashed his fist into Naruto's tiny face. Naruto let out a whimper as the man threw him by his hair into the group of villagers and shinobi while his mouth and nose and mouth began to bleed from the punch. "Please don't," he begged as the blood filled his mouth to the point where it was forced to run his chin. Before long it was near impossible for anyone to see anything but red surrounding the lips and chin of the boy as the bleeding from his nose and mouth finally slowed. "Shut up, demon," shouted one of the few shinobi in the group before he kicked Naruto in chest and stomach as hard as he could. This causing Naruto's stomach to heave and his merger lunch to spill across the ground before he curling into a tiny ball so that he could at least protect his stomach from any future beatings. Without any other warning, the group began kicking and punching his small, whimpering form while the ones that couldn't get to him themselves seemed content to cheer on those that could. As Anko walked up to the mass of villagers and shinobi, she couldn't help but wonder what was going on, and when she kicked something that had been left in the road she began to feel sick. At her feet lay a small ratty teddy bear that had its left arm ripped off. She, like everyone else, knew very well whose this was and now knew who was in the center of this group, and when a small cry reached her ears, Anko's blood ran cold before it began to boil. With very little effort, Anko leapt into air and into the center of the group. Tears welled up in her eyes as the small boy latched onto her leg and pulled himself under her coat as he quietly cried for them to stop. "Leave now before I kill every one of you," she hissed. Everyone took a step back when they saw just how angry she was. They all knew that no one lived for very long if they pushed Mitarashi Anko too far, and by the look in her eyes she was very far over the edge. "Look, the traitor's whore is protecting the demon," sneered a young, and very stupid, Chunin-ranked shinobi. Anko gave a twisted smile that would cause even a battle-hardened Anbu to shudder. "You are going to die," she said in a creepy sing-song voice before flying through a few hand seals and shouting, "Sanejishu, hidden shadow snake hand," as two large, black snakes shoot out of her sleeves and sank their fangs into the mon's neck and shoulder. All anyone heard was a slight whimper and the beginnings of a sentence before the man fell over dead and the snakes disappeared. "Anyone else want to die?" she asked happily as she pulled out a pair of kunai. Everyone watched as her eyes flashed with excitement and her tongue ran over her lips before they all lost heart and fled. Once everyone was gone, Anko looked down between her legs as Naruto held onto her legs and trembled badly. She then saw that even after the beating he had taken, he was holding onto the left arm of the teddy bear. Anko quickly spun on her feet and sat down on the ground before pulling the boy into her lap. When she felt him stiffen and tremble even more, she cooed in such a soft voice that anyone who knew her would have fallen over dead from the shock of hearing it. "There now, I'm not going to hurt you." The small boy simply curled up in her lap and shook like a frightened animal before whispering, "P promise." Anko smiled and ran her hand over his greasy, dirty, blood-filled hair and said, "I promise. Look, I even saved your bear." Naruto looked up and saw her holding his bear and cried, "Kuma-chan," before grabbing it and hugging the nasty thing tightly to his chest. "You named your bear, Bear?" asked Anko lovingly as she rubbed his back gently while inside she was amazed that all of his cuts and bruises were already healing. She figured that it had to do with the reason everyone hated him. Uzumaki Naruto was the vessel for the greatest of the tailed beasts, and the one responsible for nearly destroying Konohagakure and killing most of their shinobi population. Anko knew that Naruto wasn't the demon that most everyone else thought he was, and for that they tried to kill him and mistreated him. The saddest part was that Naruto had no clue why they treated him the way they did, because after the Yondaime Hokage had sealed the demon inside of him at the cost of his own life, the Sandaime Hokage had been forced to make a law forbidding anyone of speaking of it to the younger generations. Sadly, this included Naruto. The only reason Anko knew about it, all the facts that is, was because of her job. As a torture and interrogation specialist, she learned many things from many people that she wasn't supposed to. She had been alive when the Kyuubi attacked and would have helped fight it if it hadn't been for the fact that she was still a week away from graduating from the academy. She, like everyone else, thought that Naruto was the demon reborn until the Sandaime Hokage sat her down with her first subject, who happened to be the first person to ever attack the poor boy. After that, she had known that if Naruto was the demon, he would have finished what he started long ago and would have never let the villagers treat him the way they did. Sadly, Naruto was Naruto, and how could a 4-year-old defend himself against shinobi and villagers that were much older and stronger? Who or why you? Asked Naruto softly as he looked up at Anko with bright blue eyes. My name is Mitarashi Anko, and you are Uzumaki Naruto, she cooed gently. She paid no mind to the villagers and shinobi that were glaring at her as she sat in the center of the street. She then slowly began to wipe away some of the blood covering his mouth. Why or why you being nice to me? He asked fearfully. Because you have done nothing wrong, she said calmly before adding. And because I am like you. How? I am hated by most of the village for no reason, just like you. I have to deal with their name calling and glares, just like you, she answered. Why do they hate you? You're really pretty and nice, he said, this time without a stutter and in a much more cheerful tone. This amazed her to no end. How could anyone seem so happy after such an attack? How could anyone seem so happy after living the life he had been forced to lead? I used to be a student of an evil man. He betrayed the village and became a missing nin, and everyone thinks I am the same, she said sadly. What's a missing nin? Asked Naruto. It's a shinobi who leaves their village without permission, she answered with a smile. What's a shinobi? Asked the boy. Anko couldn't help but laugh as he asked question after question. Being a shinobi is very complicated, Naru-chan. By definition, a shinobi is an assassin or spy whom is highly trained for stealth and combat, she said calmly. You mean you kill people? Asked Naruto nervously. He found it hard to believe that the one person who had been so nice to him killed people, ironically ignoring the dead body not far from them. That is where it gets complicated. Yes, I kill people, she admitted. But mostly I do it to protect those I love in this village. I'll admit that I have killed someone for the simple fact of I wanted them dead. There are shinobi out there that will kill anyone, anywhere, and at any time. They simply love killing people. While others will only kill when they have to or when their village is threatened. Do you understand? I think so, he said softly. So you're not a bad person, you're just getting rid of the bad people. Close enough, Anko said with a light laugh. Anko ne-chan, older, big sister? Asked Naruto nervously. Yes, Naru-chan, she replied. Are you going to leave me? He asked quietly. Anko had to strain her ears to hear him, but nonetheless she did hear him. No, Naru-chan, I'm not going to leave you. Why don't you come back to my place with me? She offered. She couldn't help but smile as Naruto's eyes light up brightly and he nodded his head quickly. Anko lifted him up so that she could stand before taking him by the hand and leading him away from the village. Naruto became confused and worried when they came to a huge fenced-in forest that had a large warning sign on it. I don't think we're supposed to go in there. he whispered softly as he moved inside Anko's coat and hugged her leg. He might not have known how to read, but even he understood the skull and crossbones very well. But I live in there. This place is called the Forest of Death. Now, don't be scared, she said as Naruto began to tremble slightly at the name. I'm not going to let anything hurt you, my little Naru-chan. We will be at my place before you can say, ramen. What's ramen? Started Naruto before he and Anko disappeared in a puff of smoke only to reappear in the middle of the forest in front of a large tower. Wow! He cried excitedly as he looked around them and saw that they weren't where they were. How did you do that? He asked. That was a ninjutsu called Shunshin no Jutsu, body flicker technique. You learn it once you earn the rank of Chunin, but if you're good then I'll teach it to you sooner, she offered as she led a now bouncing Naruto into the tower and up to her floor. Anko was the only one who actually lived, or wanted to live, there, so the Sandaime Hokage had given her her own floor towards the top of the tower to turn into an apartment after her parents died. This, along with the training rooms and forest, meant that Anko had a very isolated place to live and train while not having to suffer because of the isolation. Does anyone else live here? Naruto asked as he walked up yet another flight of stairs. No, most think I'm crazy for living here. Well, okay, I may be a little crazy, but normal is so boring, she stated while Naruto simply giggled at her. Anko ne-chan, can I be a shinobi? He asked. Of course you can. In fact, I'm going to train you myself, she answered. Really? Yes, really. I'll turn you into a Hokage. What's a Hokage? Asked Naruto. A Hokage is the strongest shinobi in the village. They control all of the other shinobi and send us out on mission and such. The Sandaime Hokage is a very nice man. I'll take you to meet him soon, she explained. Oh, well, I'm going to be the greatest Hokage ever, he vowed as he pumped his tiny fist and bear into the air. Big words coming from someone with a teddy bear, teased Anko. Shut up, Anko ne-chan. Kuma-chan will help me become Hokage and then she will be my most trusted advisor, he stated firmly. Anko was a little shocked at the fact that he knew what an advisor even was, but the fact that he was planning on making his teddy bear his most trusted advisor caused her to laugh loudly. As she laughed, she couldn't help but wonder when the last time she had laughed like this was. Anko ne-chan, why didn't you just do that flicker thing to your room instead of making me walk up these stairs? Asked Naruto weakly as his pace up the stairs was beginning to slow. Poor little Naru-chan, she teased before lifting him up onto her shoulders. That better? Yep, he said happily as laid his head down on top of hers. And to answer your question, I have traps set up in my apartment, and if I tried to do the flicker thing, as you called it, I would set them off. People can leave doing it but not enter, she explained softly before she felt Naruto's head nod against hers. She didn't say anything, but she was having a hard time not gauging at the poor boy's smell. She knew he hadn't been given a chance to bathe in a long time, if ever, unless one counted being thrown into a puddle as a bath. Finally, she had made it to her floor, and as she opened the door and stepped in, Naruto's head shot up and looked around. Contrary to popular belief, Anko's home was pretty normal. There were no implements of torture laying around, and blood wasn't sprayed all over the walls. There was a couch, a pair of overstuffed chairs, and a few tables. The kitchen was a normal everyday kitchen with a stove, sink, refrigerator, and cabinets. There was also the few odds and ends that Anko had placed around the rooms, a few pictures of some of her friends, and a few bookshelves filled with different scrolls and thick leather-bound books on many different topics. As Naruto was lowered to the floor, his calloused feet made contact with the soft tan carpet that covered Anko's floor. This feeling was amazing to him as he was used to walking over rocks and glass in his bare feet. Anko noticed the dreamy smile on his face as he wiggled his toes in her carpet and couldn't help but give a dark, humorless laugh. The poor thing probably thinks that carpet is Kami's gift to man. She thought as the boy squatted down and ran his fingers over the soft material. Naru-chan, how would you like a bath? She offered. Do I smell? He asked softly as he hung his head and looked at the carpet. Yes you do, but it's not your fault. Why don't you come with me and we'll get you cleaned up? She said gently as she reached her hat out for him to take. Naruto simply nodded his head and took her hand before he was led down a small hallway and into one of the 4 doorways which turned out to be a bathroom. As he looked around he saw a very large bathtub in one corner of the room and a small shower in another. There was also a sink with a very large countertop and a huge mirror on the wall and a toilet. Like the other rooms, this one was also filled with some of Anko's personal items as well as a lot of candles. As she started to run the water in the bathtub, Anko turned to Naruto and found him looking around the room with the same wonder written across his face that he had in the other rooms. Now, do you think you can wash yourself? She asked calmly while inside she was hoping he could. She was only 16 years old and it seemed like she had just became a Ka-san, mother, and when Naruto shifted uncomfortably she sighed and said, "Come here." Naruto walked up to her and soon found himself standing in front of his new, Ne-chan. She then lifted him up and placed him into the warm water. Naruto sighed happily as the warm water began to wash away the caked-on dirt and blood from his body. As she began to scrub the boy she couldn't help but say, "I swear you have more dirt on you than any Iwa nin I've ever met." "What's a Iwa nin?" asked the boy before he was dipped under the water. Iwa is a shortened name for Iwagakure no Sato, or village hidden among rocks. An Iwa nin is simply a shinobi from Iwagakure. She explained absently as she continued to scrub away the filth from the small child. "Where's that?" asked the inquisitive blonde. "It's in Earth Country. Iwagakure is one of the 5 great shinobi villages. They specialize in earth-based jutsus. In the past we have had many wars with them and in one of those wars is when the Yondaime Hokage gained the name, the Yellow Flash of Konoha." She stated proudly as she began to wash his hair for what seemed like the 100th time. She was amazed, and disgusted, by the amount of dirt and blood the boy's hair held, and each time she washed it, it seemed to get longer and longer. Most of the hair was still matted down and it was already down to his neck. "Anko Ne-chan. Yes. Can I stay with you?" asked the boy pleadingly. "We'll see, Naru-chan," she said softly. It took 2 hours and 10 different baths before Naruto was finally clean, but now that he felt better than he ever had in his short life and it showed as he smiled brightly at his Ne-chan, as she dried him with a large fluffy towel before exiting the room for a moment. She returned shortly after with one of her old shirts, which seemed to be very old since it looked no different than any other shirt a villager would wear and didn't show any unnecessary skin. As she slipped the white button-up shirt over his head she pulled his tiny arms through the sleeves and watched in amusement as it fell down to his ankles. "Come with me," she said as she took him by the hand and led him into her bedroom. This room, like the others, would have shocked anyone. It was painted in a light blue color, as opposed to the white paint of the rest of the apartment, and contained a large bed, a dresser, and a large closet where Naruto noticed there were many metal mesh body gloves hanging up. "Come on Naru-chan," Anko said softly as she gently tugged his arm before leading him over to the bed. Anko slid into her bed and sat up against the headboard as she lifted Naruto up into the bed and sat him down in between her legs, facing out. Reaching to her bedside table, Anko grabbed a brush and began brushing his hair, which now fell to the middle of his back and was as bright a yellow as any flower she had ever seen. It took a long time before she was able to brush out all the knots and tangles, but when she was done she started to feel envious of the small boy's hair. Done, she said happily as she slid down in her bed and pulled Naruto into her arms. Thank you, Nei-chan, Naruto said softly as he fell asleep. You're welcome, Naru-chan, she said to the sleeping boy before closing her eyes and falling asleep herself while holding Naruto tightly to her chest. As the sunlight poured into her room, Anko was woken by the sound of Naruto's soft snores from underneath her coat. Normally she would have taken it off, but last night she had been tired and fell asleep in it. She gave a light chuckle as the demon vessel snuggled in even closer to her and resumed snoring. What am I going to do? She asked herself as she laid in bed and thought about Naruto. She stayed like this for a few more hours until Naruto began to stir. She watched as Naruto crawled out from under her coat and arched his back and stretched. Just like a little fox, she thought with a smile as the boy yawned silently before smiling brightly at her. Morning, Anko Nei-chan, he said happily. Good morning, Naru-chan, Anko replied softly. Why don't we get something to eat and after I'll take you to go see the Hokage? Okay, shouted the blonde before he jumped off of the bed and ran out of the room. Anko took the time to take a quick shower and change before she walked into the kitchen to find Naruto waiting for her. Anko Nei-chan, where can I get a coat like yours? He asked happily as Anko lifted him up to sit on the counter as she began making a quick breakfast for the two of them. Well, if you want we can go get some cloths before we go and see the Hokage, she offered. I don't have any money, he said quietly as he hung his head. Anko walked over to him and placed her hands on each side of him on the counter and said, Naru-chan, you are 4 years old. No one in their right mind would expect you to have money. When we go out later I'll buy you some cloths. Okay. Naruto looked up at her and smiled before wrapping his arms around her neck and hugging her tightly. Thank you. You're welcome, my little Naru-chan, she replied, and with that she turned back to the food and resumed cooking. Naruto watched with wide eyes and a lot of drool as Anko finished the meal and set a plate of food in front of him. She had moved him to the kitchen table when the food was almost done. As Naruto lifted some eggs into his mouth he moaned and said, This is really good. I would think so after having to eat garbage, thought Anko as she watched in awe as Naruto ate every single bit of his food in the time it took her to finish her third bite. She then noticed that Naruto began to rub his stomach and figured that he wasn't used to eating that much and had given himself a stomachache. Next time you shouldn't eat so fast, she said with a smirk. I don't want a next time, he replied pitifully while Anko couldn't help but laugh at the boy. Anko Nei-chan, where is Kuma-chan? Kuma-chan is in the laundry. She is very dirty and needs to be cleaned. And also I need to sew her arm back on, explained Anko. She had really wanted to throw the thing away but knew she couldn't do that to Naruto, so she planned on washing it as best she could and sewing it back together. Good. She needs to be clean if she is going to be my top advisor, stated Naruto firmly while Anko smiled fondly down at him. Since you're old, cloths were nothing more than rags. You are going to wear that shirt until we can get you some new cloths, she said. Okay, said Naruto simply as he swung his little legs back and forth as he sat beside Anko waiting for her to finish her food. Before long Naruto was in the arms of Anko as she ran across rooftops towards the store she wanted to take him. You know, the people who run the store we are going to are good friends of mine and they have a Masumi daughter, who's about your age. Anko commented calmly. Do you think she'll play with me? asked Naruto excitedly as Anko continued to race across the rooftops of homes and businesses alike. Who wouldn't want to play with you? Anko asked him as if it were obvious. Naruto simply smiled and waited for them to arrive at the shop. He didn't have to wait long before they were standing in front of a two-story building with a sign that read, Amaki's weapons hanging above the door. As they entered, it was plain to see that this store was purely a shinobi store, seeing as all they sold were shinobi weapons of all kinds and shinobi clothing of all sizes. Kenshin, Emi, get out here, I need your help with something. Anko shouted once she saw that no one was watching the front. Anko, shut up, came her reply while Naruto giggled at her and Anko simply shot him a smile. Hi, came a bright voice from behind them. Naruto jumped and spun around to find a young girl about his age standing there. The girl was wearing a pink traditional-style Chinese shirt made of silk, a cheongsam. She had rich brown hair and equally dark eyes. Her hair was pulled into two separate buns and her eyes seemed to shine with happiness and contentment. She also seemed to be carrying a large assortment of weapons. Too large if you asked any normal citizen of Konoha. Even some of the shinobi would agree as well since the small girl was barely 5 years old. Hello, said Naruto shyly as he moved into Anko's coat and hid behind her legs. Tenten, I want you to meet Naruto. Naru-chan, this is Amaki Tenten. Her parents run this store. Introduced Anko as she tried to coax Naruto from behind her. Just as she began making progress, a large man walked into the room. What do you need, Anko? The man asked. He looked like a hulking male form of Tenten from what Naruto could see, which wasn't a lot because he had moved back behind her legs when the man entered the room. I need an outfit for Naru-chan here, she said softly as she gently pulled Naruto out from behind her. This seemed to work as long as she held his hand. As that, started the man. Yes, Kenshin, this is Naruto. Naru-chan, this is Amaki Kenshin, Tenten's two-san father, and the best blacksmith in the whole village. His Okusan wife, when referring to someone else's, Emi used to babysit me and when my parents died she became a very good friend, said Anko. Naruto looked at the tall muscular man and said, Hello. Well Naruto, what kind of cloths are you wanting? Kenshin asked. Naruto smiled and pointed at Anko before saying, I want to look like Anko Ne-chan. You can't wear a skirt silly, said Tenten with a giggle. I didn't mean that, I want pants but the rest like hers, he said with a faint blush. Why would anyone want to look like Anko? Asked a brown-haired woman as she walked into the room and smiled at Anko and Naruto. Because Anko Ne-chan is the greatest shinobi ever. Plus she's really pretty, said Naruto loudly while Anko patted him on the head fondly. She was happy to see that he was opening up more to people. The woman looked at Naruto for a few moments before looking back at Anko and asking, How much did you pay him to say that? Anko growled and said, Shut up, Emi. Well, let's get you dressed, said Emi as she and Anko took Naruto by the hand and began to shuffle through the stacks of cloths. They soon found that when Naruto had said that he wanted to look like Anko, he meant it. Every article of clothing had to match hers exactly or he wouldn't touch it. Before long Naruto was wearing a pair of very baggy tan pants with more pockets on them than he knew what to do with, a pair of black combat boots, a black metal mesh shirt, a pair of silver metal shin guards, and a long tan-colored trench coat, which was easily his favorite part. The last thing they did was tie his hair back into a low ponytail. The only thing missing was for him to get a forehead protector but that would have to wait until he became a genin. They also told him that he would have to cut his hair to look like Anko but he said, quite loudly, that he was fine with that if it made him look more like his, Ne-chan. There. Now you look just like you, Ne-chan, said Emi happily while Anko and Naruto smiled brightly at that. Ever since they had met yesterday, both of them had smiled more in the short time they had known each other than they had in their life before they met. Now, why don't you go find Tenten-chan and play while I talk to Anko? Naruto nodded before hugging Anko once more and running off to find the small girl. How did this happen? Asked Kenshin as he brought in a large bottle of sake and 3 small dishes. At the thought of the memory, Anko quickly downed 2 dishes full of sake. That bad? Asked Emi softly. Worse. I found him in the middle of another mob getting kicked and punched. When I finally chased everyone away, he was covered in blood, bruises, and cuts. If any good came from him being a vessel, it's the fact that he heals very quickly. After I spoke with him for a bit, I took him back to my place and spent around 2 hours washing him. He had dirt and blood everywhere from Kami knows when. You should have seen his face when he first stepped foot on my carpet, said Anko with a sad, humorless laugh towards the end. I swear he must have thought that it was the greatest thing ever. Then there is Kuma-chan. Kuma-chan? Asked Kenshin. His teddy bear. She replied. He named his teddy bear, Bear. Asked Emi with a smile. That's what I asked, but Kuma-chan isn't just any bear. She is going to be his most trusted advisor when he becomes Hokage, said Anko before the 3 of them burst into peals of laughter. Meanwhile, Tenten was outside teaching Naruto how to throw a kunai. Now pull it your arm back, good. Now throw it as hard as you can and try and hit the red dot, she advised as she pointed across the yard at a row of humanoid dummies. Naruto looked at the practice dummy and saw the red dot right between his eyes. He simply stared at it for a few more moments before launching the kunai as hard as he could at the dummy, and as it hit home, Naruto and Tenten were shocked that it tore right through the bullseye and out the other side of the dummy's head. Wow! Whispered Tenten in awe. That was so cool! Naruto shouted excitedly. From there, Tenten and Naruto began to let loose a hail of kunai and shuriken upon the poor defenseless dummies. Naruto found that he could throw up to 5 kunai and have them all hit dead center while 9 out of 10 at least hit the target. He wasn't anywhere near as good with a shuriken, but he didn't let that stop him from trying. You're a natural with projectile weapons. You have to come over some more and play with me, Tenten pleaded as they walked back inside. I will if you really want me to, said Naruto shyly. You bet I do. None of my friends like weapons very much, so it's nice to have one that does, she said happily. Plus, when we get older, me and you can spar all the time. Okay, he replied softly as the 2 walked up to the 3 older people. Did you have fun? Asked Anko as she pulled Naruto into her lap. Yes, we practiced throwing shuriken and kunai, he answered with a smile. Is he any good? Kenshin asked his daughter. He's amazing. His very first throw with a kunai hit the dummy right between the eyes and went all the way through its head, she explained happily while Kenshin, Anko, and Emi looked at a now blushing Naruto in shock. Can you do it again? Asked Anko. Naruto hopped down from her lap, took hold of her hand, and drug her to Tenten's backyard where the training dummies were set up. As Naruto walked off the distance he wanted, the other 4 stood back and watched him. Finally, Naruto reached a distance he was comfortable with and pulled out a kunai that Tenten had given him before turning and facing the dummy. Naruto stared the dummy between the eyes just like he had done the first time before throwing the kunai as hard as he could. The 3 older shinobi watched the kunai rip through the dummy's skull, and out the other side before they finally let their jaws drop. They were amazed with the fact that he was so accurate yet so powerful with his throws. Tenten of course simply cheered her new friend on like she had done before. You had better have that boy training very soon or you are never allowed around here again, threatened Kenshin before his kunai wife, your own, slapped him hard on the arm and hissed. He is 4 years old. Let him have a childhood, and if he wants to train, then fine. He wants to be a shinobi. That I already know. I plan on teaching him everything I know as soon as he wants to begin training, said Anko softly as a way to appease the irate Okusan and also inform Kenshin that she did plan on training him. Now, a more important question would be, when do we start planning a wedding? Kenshin and Emi looked over at their Masumi, who was talking excitedly to Naruto while flailing her arms everywhere. Naruto began to blush under the praise, but still he smiled happily at the excited girl. It's a bit early for that. We can start talking weddings in 30 or 40 years, said Kenshin while giving the typical "to-san" answer. Try telling her that, said his kunai with a smile. So, was clothing the only thing you two were out for? No, we are going to see the Hokage next. Anko replied. Any reason? Kenshin asked. There may be a few. I'll let you know how everything turns out later. Anko answered, who sounded a little nervous before adding. Well, if we're going to get in to see him, then we need to get going. True. Agreed Emi with a small smile. Naru-chan, it's time to go, she called over to the blonde boy. The two were finally able to leave after Naruto gave Tenten his 10th promise that he would be back. As they began walking towards the Hokage Tower, Naruto was talking a mile a minute about Tenten and everything she taught him. Neither paid any attention to the glares they were getting from the villagers, and the worried looks the shinobi were giving Naruto. They saw him dressed like a mini Anko and were getting worried that there would be a second one, and to them Konohagakure could only handle one sadistic lunatic. Right before they reached the tower, Naruto and Anko passed a small park that was popular with the main clans of Konohagakure. They felt that it was safe to bring their children here because it was so close to the Hokage's office and there were shinobi of every rank coming and going at all times of the day. Nei-chan, asked Naruto shyly as he tugged on Anko's coat to gain her attention. When he saw her looking at him, he asked, Can we go play? As he pointed to the many swings in the park. I tell you what, why don't you go play while I speak with the Hokage for a little bit and I'll come find you after I'm done. I might even come get you early so you can meet the Hokage, she offered gently. Okay, said Naruto happily before he hugged her legs tightly before running off towards the swings. Anko watched with a smile before turning back to the tower and continuing to walk. Just as Naruto was about to reach the swings, he heard a slight whimper. He knew that sound better than anyone, so he quickly looked around to see who needed help. He soon found a group of 3 older boys standing around a small, dark indigo-haired girl while they pushed her to the ground and called her names. You white-eyed freak. You think you're so much better than us because you're a Hyuga, don't you? Shouted one of the boys as he pushed the girl to the ground again. Please stop, said the girl softly as tears ran down her face. After seeing this, rage overwhelmed Naruto and with a feral growl he took out his kunai and charged the boys. As he reached them, Naruto jumped into the air and kicked the one he had seen pushing the girl as hard as he could in the side of the head. Everyone in the park stopped at the sound the collision made and watched as the boy was knocked off his feet and flew a good 5 feet before falling limply to the ground. Leave now before I kill every one of you, he said, repeating the words he heard Anko use when she saved him the night before. By now the boy he had kicked had finally regained his feet and was stalking towards Naruto. Seeing their friend back on his feet seemed to give the other 2 added courage, so they too moved towards Naruto. As the first boy tried to punch him, Naruto dodged to the side and slammed his kunai into the back of his hand. This shocked everyone around them. They had just seen a 4-year-old boy shove a kunai through the older boy's hand without even blinking. I told you to leave, hissed Naruto as he ripped his kunai out of the boy's hand. Why you? Get him, ordered the boy as he cradled his bleeding hand against his chest. The other kids in the playground, and a few adults, watched as the two other older boys moved towards Naruto, but the blonde boy never gave them a chance. With two swift kicks to a very sensitive area, the boys collapsed to the ground and cried. Let it not be said that one needs years of training to take down someone larger than oneself. Seeing that the boys were done, Naruto turned back to the Hyuga and asked, "Are you alright?" "Why yes," stuttered the girl softly as she took Naruto's offered hand and rose to her feet. Thank you. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. What's your name?" he asked as the three boys began to crawl away from them. Hyuga Hinata. She replied as she nervously tapped her index fingers together. Do you want to go play on the swings with me? Asked Naruto with a bright smile. The shy girl only blushed and nodded, but that was all Naruto needed as he grabbed her hand and pulled her over towards the swings. Sadly, they were never given the chance to actually swing as one of the boys' Ka-san, mother, started running towards Naruto with a large stick. I better go, Hinata-chan, said Naruto quickly before running from the mammoth woman. Luckily for him, the woman was very out of shape and gave up the chase just as she reached the swings. As Naruto ran towards the Hokage's office as fast as he couldn't help but wonder if the pear-eyed girl would ever play with him again. Any further thought was interrupted as he rounded a corner and headed straight into a smirking Anko. Naru-chan, what's wrong? Is it another mob? Asked Anko worriedly. Why yes, he said as he gasped for breath. Anko didn't waste any time as she quickly picked up the boy and ran back towards the Hokage's office where they were quickly led in by his secretary. The Sandaime Hokage was a little shocked to see Anko walk into his office with a little, blonde-haired, male version of herself in her arms. You look worried, Anko. There was another mob, Hokage-sama. She answered with a sigh as she sat down heavily into one of the three chairs across from the Hokage while Naruto sat in her lap and looked at the man with interest. Anko-ne-chan, you told me that the Hokage was the strongest shinobi in the village. This guy is so old, he said finally after staring at the man for a few moments. Instead of being insulted, the elderly Hokage laughed at this while Anko hid her face behind Naruto and giggled. Naru-chan, this man may be old but he is very strong, she said softly. Naruto stood up in her lap and pointed at the Hokage and shouted. Okay Jii-san. When I grow up I'm going to be the Hokage and when I do I'm going to send you to a old people's home. At this declaration the Hokage smiled at the boy and said, when you're ready to take the title of Hokage from me then I'll give it to you without any hassle. Now, Naruto, do you like staying with Anko? Naruto sat back down and looked at Anko for a moment before saying. She's my Ne-chan. I love staying with her. Naruto, how would you like to live with her from now on? Asked the old man. Can I really? Asked Naruto as hope shined brightly in his bright blue eyes. Anko wishes to adopt you, answered the Hokage. At this, Naruto jumped to his feet and threw his arms around Anko's neck and began to cry. Anko smiled happily and wrapped her arms around his tiny waist and hugged him tightly. So is that a yes? She whispered. Why yes, he said as he wiped his runny nose on his coat sleeve. Will you be my Ne-chan still, or will you be my Ka-chan, like mother but less formal, think mommy? Ne-chan, Ka-san, makes me sound old, said Anko as she scrunched up her nose at the thought of being old. Will me name change? He asked. Only if you want it to. Would you rather be Uzumaki Naruto or Mitarashi Naruto? She asked calmly while inside she knew which one she wanted him to pick. I want to be Mitarashi Naruto, he shouted excitedly while Anko smiled happily at his choice. Before they could do anything else, a familiar mammoth of a woman stormed into the office as she drug her Masuko-san in behind her, ignoring the shouting guards and secretary. The woman stormed right up to the Hokage's desk and shouted, "I demand that you do something about that thing right this minute." The Hokage must have gotten this a lot because all he did was sit back in his seat, entwine his fingers in front of his chin, and asked in a calm voice, "May I ask what he has done?" "That little monster stabbed my baby boy with a kunai for no reason," shouted the woman. "And when I tried to catch him he ran off." At this Anko looked at Naruto, who was standing in the chair with his arms wrapped around her neck, and said, "I thought you said there was a mob." Naruto snickered a little and whispered loudly, "I thought you said, blob." This got a laugh out of Anko and the corners of the Hokage's mouth to twitch. "Naruto, why did you stab this young man?" asked the Hokage. "He was being mean to Hinata-chan," accused Naruto. "You little liar. My Masuko told me he was playing quietly with his friends when you ran up and stabbed him," the woman yelled. By now Anko had had enough of the woman's shrill voice as she said, "If you don't shut up or at the very least speak in a normal tone, I will slit your throat." The woman blanched before she sat down quietly in the chair furthest from Anko. "Miss, I happen to know what happened at the park because I have Anbu watching it at all times," said the Hokage calmly while the boy paled and started looking nervous. "I happen to know that your Masuko and two of his friends were bullying Hyuga Hinata before Naruto showed up. After he told them to leave, your Masuko attacked him. Good job, by the way," whispered Anko with a sadistic smirk. "Thanks," Naruto whispered back. And while Naruto might have held off on stabbing the boy, he did nothing wrong, finished the Hokage. The boy's Ka-san shot her Masuko a look that made him sink into his chair even further before turning back to the Hokage and saying, "Please excuse me, Hokage-sama." She then stood and dragged her Masuko out of the office by his cut hand. As the doors shut, the Hokage sighed and shook his head. "Naruto, I did see the fight and I was wondering if you would like to enter the academy early." Naruto's eyes light up with excitement, but Anko quickly stepped in and said, "No thank you." "But why?" whined Naruto. "Don't whine, Naru-chan," Anko said softly. "And I want to take you on as an apprentice until you graduate. This way you can go to the academy like you normally would, but you would be my student until you become a genin." "Can we start now?" asked Naruto as he jumped up and down in the chair. "As soon as you want," she answered. "Now, go wait for me out front." Naruto hugged her before running out of the office. "Are you sure this is what you want?" asked the Hokage as he handed Anko the adoption papers and a second stack of papers to make him her apprentice. "Yes. He needs someone as much as I do," she said softly as she started signing the papers. "Besides, you saw the way he was dressed. He wouldn't even touch anything if it didn't match my cloths, and as for teaching him, my style is a very demanding style to learn, but I think he will really excel at it." "Are you going to teach him everything?" he asked calmly. "As his master, mistress, whatever, I can teach him anything I feel he should learn," she said a little defensively. "Anko, I didn't mean it like that," said the Hokage with a small smile. "I meant, are you going to teach him jutsus well past genin and academy level? Also, you would be his mistress." "Sorry," she said sheepishly. The Hokage was one of the only people who was ever kind to her, so she had the utmost respect for him. "To answer your question, yes, I plan on teaching him as fast as he can learn, and I don't plan on holding anything back because of age or rank." "Could this be because you want him to excel at the academy?" asked the Hokage teasingly while Anko's cheeks flushed a little. "Maybe a little. He will be in a class with many of the heirs and heiresses of the major clans. If I don't teach him, then he will be going into the academy at a disadvantage, she explained while the Hokage nodded his head and agreed with her reasoning. Also, he would suffer without anyone around to help him. I understand, Anko, and if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask, said the kind, elderly Hokage. Then I'll be looking for you when I need a babysitter, she joked as she finished signing the papers and left the office of a now slightly worried Hokage. As she exited the tower, Anko found her new Tuto, younger, little brother, outside pretending to be in the middle of a large battlefield. She couldn't help but laugh when Naruto was killed. You know, most kids imagine themselves as the hero, but you have yourself dying early in the battle, she teased as Naruto jumped to his feet and ran up to her smiling. But I was fighting off an army of evil Hokages, he stated as Anko took his hand and began walking back to their apartment. Why were they evil? She asked. They kidnapped you and wouldn't give you back, he explained. So you died trying to save me? Asked Anko as she smiled. Of course, but once you train me to be a shinobi, I'll be able to save you and live, he said proudly. A worthy goal, she teased as she patted him on the head fondly. As they started to walk past a small stand, an older man shouted, Anko, when are you going to stop by again? You know we need the business. Anko smiled at the man before looking down at Naruto and asking, Are you hungry? When Naruto nodded his head quickly, Anko led him into the small stand and lifted him up into one of the chairs around the counter. Tuki, you old fart, how have you been? Asked Anko while the old man smiled at her and Naruto giggled at the name. I'm as good as can be expected, but the more important question is, who is this? He asked as he looked down as Naruto. It is Mitarashi Naruto, my new Tuto, she said proudly. Naruto, huh? Said the man as he studied Naruto for a few moments. Tell me, Naruto, do you like ramen? What's ramen? He asked with a confused look. The man looked about ready to have a heart attack before shouting, Ayame, start boiling water. He then walked away muttering things like, has never had ramen, and, I'll show him. This confused Naruto even more until Anko said, Naru-chan, Tuki owns and runs this stand, which is a ramen stand. After I bugged him enough, he started making dango and sweet bean soup as well, but the man swears that ramen is the cure to all problems. His Masumi Ayame, who's about 12 years old, helps him a lot and makes very good dango, which is my favorite food along with sweet bean soup. Is ramen good? Asked Naruto. Yes, it is, and Tuki makes some of the best ramen you will ever have, she stated firmly. A few minutes later, the old man came back with a large bowl of beef ramen and a large plate filled with dango. Here you go, he said as he set the food in front of the two. Naruto stared at the bowl filled with noodles and broth before taking a tentative bite. As the noodles and broth filled his mouth, Naruto's eyes went wide before he shivered and began shoveling the food into his mouth. Anko watched and laughed as yet another person was made into a ramen addict by Tuki's ramen. Shaking her head slightly, Anko began to eat the sweet-tasting dango in front of her, and before long the two had eaten everything within arm's reach. Most of this was done by Naruto. Just like at breakfast, Naruto had eaten too much, too quickly, and was now holding his stomach and groaning. I thought you said that you weren't going to do this again, asked Anko, who seemed to think that this was all very funny. Ramen? Good, he mumbled while Anko and Tuki simply laughed at the blonde boy while Tuki's Masumi, Ayame, gave him a sympathetic look. Anko stood and took out some money for the food, but as she was about to lay it on the counter, Tuki stopped her. Technically, you never ordered anything, so I can't charge you. Besides, with the way he ate that bowl of ramen, one believed that he will be coming back frequently, he said with a smile. Thanks, Tuki, said Anko as she put her money back in her pocket before picking up Naruto and placing him on her shoulders. Ready to go, Naru-chan? Yes. He answered softly as he laid his head on hers like he had done the night before. As they started back to the apartment, Anko began thinking about Naruto's fight with the older boys. She knew for a fact that the boy he had stabbed was in the Shinobi Academy, and it was more than likely that his friends were as well, and the fact that Naruto was able to beat them without a mark to show for it made Anko even more excited to begin training him. Naru-chan? She asked. Yes, Nei-chan. What exactly happened with the Hyuga girl? She asked calmly. I was getting ready to start swinging when I heard someone whimpering. When I looked around, I saw 3 older boys knocking Hinata-chan down and calling her names, so I ran over there and kicked one of them on the head before telling them to leave. When they didn't, the one I kicked tried to punch me, so I moved and stabbed his hand with my kunai. He then told the other 2 to get me, so I kicked them between the legs, said Naruto happily while Anko couldn't help but smile sadistically at the last part. And when me and Hinata-chan were about to go play on the swings, that fat lady started chasing me with a stick, so I ran. Well, as soon as you want to, we can begin your training, she said while her own excited gleam in her eyes. What will you teach me? He asked. The first thing we will be working on is teaching you to read and write. After that, I will start teaching you the basics of my taijutsu style, some of the academy ninjutsus, and some basic poisons. Once you learn those, I will start teaching you my snake and poison ninjutsus. By the time Anko was done speaking, Naruto was literally bouncing with excitement. Normally you would also learn weapons, but you seem to be very good with kunai already, so, while I might teach you to use a katana, those will more than likely be your main weapons. Can we start when we get home? Asked the excited blue-eyed boy. Anko gave a quick smile at the word, home, before saying, as soon as we get home, I'll start teaching you to read. The rest of the walk was spent talking about what he was going to learn and of his 2 new friends. Anko couldn't help but wonder if he was planning on making any male friends, not that she minded any. Once Naruto became a teenager, most of his male friends would stare at her chest and then she would be forced to kill them, so this saved her some paperwork. As the 2 made it to the fence surrounding the forest, they saw a woman who looked slightly older than Anko leaving. The woman had shoulder-length, black wavy hair, ruby red lips, and deep crimson eyes. She wore ceremonial bandages that covered her waist, torso, and shoulders, while her metal mesh undershirt had one solid red sleeve that covered her right arm and her left was left bare. All in all, this woman was strikingly beautiful. But not as pretty as my Nei-chan, thought Naruto as the woman and Anko walked towards each other. Anko, you should hear the rumors going around about you. They're saying you have a kid, she started before trailing off once she finally noticed Naruto sitting on her shoulders. Kurenai, this is Mitarashi Naruto, formerly Uzumaki, my new tuto. Naru-chan, this is my best friend for many years, Yuahi Kurenai, said Anko while smiling at the shocked look on Kurenai's face. Hello, said Naruto happily while the poor woman could only wave back weakly. We were just about to head inside so I could teach Naru-chan here how to read and write. Do you want to come too? Offered Anko. Kurenai nodded dumbly as she continued to stare at Naruto before following them back to their apartment. Once they were there, Anko sat down with Naruto and began teaching him how to read and write simple words. She was amazed at the speed Naruto seemed to pick everything up, and as it began to get dark outside, Naruto fell asleep at the table with his face propped up in his hand. Naru-chan, why don't you go to bed? We will start again early tomorrow morning, offered Anko. Naruto nodded before standing, hugging Anko tightly, and running off to Anko's room where he fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Kurenai, who had been silent the entire time, finally asked, are you going to tell me what is going on? Anko sighed and went into the kitchen where she got a small bottle of sake and two small dishes before walking back into the living room and sat down opposite Kurenai around the low table. She then poured them both a drink before saying, "Last night I was out walking when I found Naruto being beaten by a not-so-small gathering of shinobi and villagers. After I killed one of the shinobi and scared off the rest, I took Naruto back here to clean him up and give him a place to sleep. This morning I went to see the Hokage and adopted Naruto and took him on as my apprentice. It's only been one day and he has already caught on to my sadistic nature." "What do you mean?" asked Kurenai, who had understood everything but the last part. She was also a little shocked that she had taken the small blonde as her apprentice. Anko laughed and smiled fondly at the memory before explaining. "Earlier today when I went to the Hokage's office, I left Naruto at the park near there. Before he could even make it to the swings, he found a few academy boys picking on the Hyuga heiress. Naruto kicked one of them in the head before stabbing him with a kunai when he tried to punch him. He then kicked the other two in the balls before taking the Hyuga over to the swings to play. He was soon chased out of the park by the Ka-san of the boy he stabbed, and when I met him he said that there was a mob chasing him. Imagine my surprise when a single woman showed up with her Masuko to yell at him. When I asked him about it, he said, 'I thought you said blob.'" At the end of the story, Kurenai and Anko were both laughing loudly while Kurenai was a little worried about having another Anko around. Anko might have been her best friend, but even she thought that Anko was crazy as hell. "Are you sure about this, Anko?" asked Kurenai seriously. "Yes. Him and I both need this," Anko replied softly. Kurenai simply nodded her head. She knew how hard it was for Anko and Naruto, not from first-hand experience but from the fact that she was the only one willing to listen to Anko when she felt like talking, so she knew well everything the villagers did to her, or said to her. When it came to Uzumaki Naruto, however, she knew nothing and had struggled to keep it the way. Kurenai was not trying to be unkind or unfeeling, but she knew that it would break her heart to hear some of the things the village did to the poor boy. She knew that even Anko knew very little of his pain because she at least had a family, friends, a chance to grow up a little, whereas Naruto had been a pariah his whole life and had never had a friend or loved one to talk to until now. "Well, I for one am happy for you," Kurenai stated before raising her dish in a toast to the two of them. Once she downed her sake, she added jokingly, "But did you have to dress him like you?" Anko shook her head and smiled. "I never had a choice. I took Naruto to Kenshin and Emi's this morning and he stated quite firmly that he wanted to be just like me, minus the skirt of course." "Did he and Tenten get along okay?" Kurenai asked. "The best of friends. Tenten taught Naruto how to throw a kunai and then we found out that the boy must be a prodigy with the things. He can throw a kunai clean through the head of a practice dummy's head from over 20 feet. Anko boasted. "Impressive," agreed Kurenai calmly, while inside she knew that she was going to have to listen to the proud Ka-san speech every time Naruto succeeded at something. The two were interrupted by a soft voice from the hallway. "Nei-chan." Anko looked and found Naruto standing in the hallway with tears in his eyes. "What is it, Naru-chan?" she asked gently. Naruto didn't say anything but ran to her, jumped into her arms and hugged her tightly. "What's wrong?" Anko pressed. "IIW woke up and thought that you left me," said Naruto quietly as he curled into a tiny ball in her lap and cried. Kurenai watched as Anko whispered reassurances to the small boy while running her hand gently over his back. She was shocked and amazed at the fact that Anko could be a caring Ka-san figure and not just some crazy, sadistic, psycho woman they all knew she was. But if she were to be honest with herself, even she wanted to comfort the crying child. "I think I'll head home," she said softly to the two. "Good night, Kurenai," said Anko as her friend stood and walked towards the door. Good night, Anko. Naruto, she said before walking out of the apartment and disappearing in a puff of smoke. Naru-chan, why did you think I left you? Do you really think that I would adopt you only to leave you again? Asked Anko as she stood and carried Naruto back into her room before laying him down and sliding in beside him. No, but one time a villager P pretended to be nice T to me, and when I followed her into an alley she stared hitting me, cried Naruto as Anko pulled him even closer to her and held him tightly. Well, I'm never going to leave you, Naru-chan, she said gently. Why you P promise? Asked the demon vessel. It had been 4 years since Anko and Naruto had found each other, and for 4 years Anko has been teaching Naruto everything she knew. Every ninjutsu, everything about their taijutsu style, and even the one and only genjutsu she knew. When Anko had told the Hokage that she thought that Naruto would excel at her style, she had no idea just how much of an understatement she had made. No, Naruto didn't just excel, he was a prodigy when it came to poisons and her snake jutsus. He had already learned the basics of every jutsu she knew and only had to refine what he knew to the point of mastery. He had even taught Anko a few new ninjutsus as well as created his own, and with the help of Kenshin and Tenten his kenjutsu was very advanced for his age. Tenten was just happy to have someone to spar with at all hours of the night. This was a sort of unwritten rule for being Mitarashi Anko's apprentice. You had to be ready for training of any kind at any time of day or night. Naruto had also learned why Anko was considered a sadist when she woke him up at 3 in the morning for agility training. This consisted of Anko throwing kunai at Naruto for an entire day. Needless to say that Naruto would have made any of Tenten's practice dummies jealous with the number of kunai that were lodged in his body. The hardest thing for Anko came when Naruto turned 6 years old. This was when she believed he was ready to hear about the Kyuubi. Kyuubi no Yuko, or the nine-tailed demon fox, was the demon responsible for nearly wiping Konohagakure off the map. If it hadn't been for the Yondaime Hokage giving up his life to seal the demon away, every man, woman, and child would have been slaughtered. After flying into a rage, collapsing into tears, and not speaking for a few days, Naruto finally came to terms with his lot in life and vowed that he would become Hokage regardless of what he held inside him. He even started training harder, stating that he needed to be stronger if he was going to keep Kyuubi in its prison. Anko didn't have the heart to tell him that he didn't need to and that the seal wouldn't be affected by how strong he was, so she let him believe what he wanted and trained him how he asked. So, at 8 years old, Mitarashi Naruto was about to face his first day of the Shinobi Academy. This made many people nervous because everyone knew that Naruto had picked up every single sadistic trait that Anko had, and coupled with the fact that he was even more of a prodigy in snake and poison techniques than Anko herself was, meant that many parents were telling their children to not pick fights with the blonde boy. Currently the blonde boy was sitting at the kitchen table with his mistress and Nei-chan eating a large breakfast of ramen, dango, and eggs. Naru-chan, I wanted to speak with you about something, Anko said calmly as she pushed her plate away from her and turned to Naruto. Naru-chan, do you really want to be my apprentice still? At this, Naruto began choking on large bite of ramen he had been eating. As he coughed and hacked his throat clear of the noodles, he looked at Anko like she had lost her mind and said, Anko Nei-chan, I love being your apprentice. Why, Naru-chan, I have little else I can teach you. All you really need to do is refine your skills, said a now 20-year-old Anko. She knew that she was very proud of him but couldn't stop the small part of her from wishing that he was a slower learner, if only for the fact that she would still have something to teach him. The fact that he didn't seem to need her anymore the way he once did was weighing heavily on her mind. Nei-chan, You could teach me advanced anatomy, advanced psychology, torture, and interrogation. There are still lots of things I need to learn from you. Please keep me as your apprentice. He begged. Anko had never really considered that he would want to follow her into her field of study. Truthfully, she hadn't let herself think of it in case he didn't want or learned what she did and became scared of her. Are you sure? She asked seriously while inside she was all but jumping up and down cheering that he wanted to continue. Yes. Nei-chan, I know what you and Ibiki do and I don't see you any different. If you and he didn't do your job, our village would suffer from our lack of knowledge. I also know that you enjoy it because you are crazy, but so am I, he said teasingly with his own sadistic smirk, something that Anko had taught him long ago. Watch it, brat, she growled playfully back to him before sighing. I will keep you on as my apprentice and I will start teaching you what is required in my field, but our training will have to be held after your lessons end at the academy. Seeing Naruto grumble at th last part, she added, I know you don't want to go, and I know you will be bored out of your skull, but I want you graduating with children your own age. Too many good men and women graduate early and die or go crazy because they couldn't handle it. I also know that you are much stronger than they were and would be fine, but I won't take that chance. Fine, Naruto said with a sigh. Besides, what do I expect you to do in the academy? Asked Anko with a smirk. Naruto snapped to attention and stated. You said, you better show those snot-nosed little shits what a real shinobi of the leaf is, or so help me you will be doing agility training from 3 days straight. Good. And my threat is very real. If you aren't at the top of your class in every subject, I will make your life a living hell, she said in a sickeningly sweet tone of voice which caused Naruto to shudder. I love you too, Nei-chan, mocked Naruto. With a growl, Anko dove at Naruto and the two began one of their all-too-common mock fights. Like all the other fights, this one ended with Naruto in a headlock while Anko gave him a noogie. Stop! Screamed Naruto as he tried to pull his head from under her arm. Say it, she ordered. Come on, whined Naruto. Say it or you'll be late, she threatened. Fine. Anko Nei-chan is the most beautiful woman in the world and I, Mitarashi Naruto, am a snot-nosed little bastard who is beyond lucky to have her as my Nei-chan. Naruto said before making mock retching noises as Anko let him go and pushed him to the ground. I always knew you were smart, she said fondly as she started straightening his now messy blonde hair. Now go or you'll be late. Bye, he called before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Naruto arrived just in time to scare most of the class and shock their teacher. Ignoring their looks and glares, Naruto walked down and sat beside his longtime friend Hyuga Hinata. Hello Hinata-chan, he whispered as the instructor resumed taking roll. I was worried when you didn't show, she said with only a slight stutter. After 4 years of being friends with a very loud Naruto and an equally loud Tenten, Hinata had gained back most of her confidence and had lost most of her stutter. Anko Nei-chan got me in another headlock, he muttered while Hinata could only giggle. Hinata knew all too well what that meant and had always thought it was funny. She was also one of the only ones that knew about Kyuubi and Naruto. Naruto had told her and Tenten after her Ka-san had passed away, giving birth to her Imouto, Hanabi. While Tenten and Hinata were shocked, they didn't really mind. In fact, it helped them both realize that their problems seemed small compared to his. Naruto had tried to tell them that their problems weren't nothing, but they just wouldn't listen to him. Mitarashi Naruto, said their teacher with a slight wince as he read the name. Here, supplied Naruto simply yet loudly. Naruto, since you were late to begin with and then proceeded to talk to Hinata, you missed when I said that you were supposed to stand and tell everyone about yourself, said the teacher with an exasperated sigh. Oh, said Naruto as he got to his feet. As you heard, my name is Mitarashi Naruto. I was adopted when I was 4 by my Nei-chan and mistress, Mitarashi Anko, who is a Tokubetsu Junin. She has been training me since I was 4 years old. I am good with poison and snake jutsus as well as my taijutsu. I enjoy spending time with my Nei-chan as well as Hinata-chan, Tenten-chan, and Anko Nei-chan's friends. I am about to begin learning torture and interrogation tactics from Anko Nei-chan. With that, Naruto sat down while most of the class looked confused by what he had said, while the rest, plus the teacher, were shocked that he had already had so much training. Hinata seemed to be the only one who wasn't affected by his introduction because she had known it all for years. Once everyone was finished introducing themselves, the teacher said, "My name is Yumino Iruka and I will be your teacher for the next 4 years. During this time you will learn everything you need to begin a career as a shinobi of Konoha. Some of you are entering the class ahead of other, while some are entering with little to no prior knowledge. This will not harm you in any way. I will teach you all you need to know to become genins. Once you graduate, it will be your sensei's duty to train you even further, but you must be willing to practice and study outside of what is expected of you if you wish to excel in this line of work." "Yes, Sakura," he added as a pink-haired girl raised her hand. Naruto was mentally kicking himself for not listening to their names when the girl asked, "What will we be learning?" "I will be teaching you about chakra and chakra control, our village's history, survival training, basic jutsus, and what different ranks mean and how to achieve them. I will also be teaching you the basics of taijutsu and about some of our most famous shinobi. There might be more, but that all depends on how quickly everyone picks up the basics. Naruto, can you tell the class what ninjutsu you used to get here and why I should be punishing you?" asked Iruka as he glared at the blonde boy. "That was the body flicker technique. As to why you should be punishing me, because it is a move that is supposed to be taught when someone reaches the rank of Chunin," explained Naruto calmly. "And why can't I punish you?" asked Iruka. "Because a mistress or master may teach their apprentice anything they feel fit, regardless of rank or age," he replied. "Correct. For a shinobi to take on an apprentice is a rare thing, and for one to take one on so young is almost unheard of, but Mitarashi Anko has never been one to conform with any set of rules or edict," said Iruka, who sounded almost spiteful. "You might want to be careful, Iruka-sensei. That almost sounded like you were insulting my Nei-chan," said Naruto warningly as his lips curved into a smirk. Iruka seemed to ignore this and began his lesson for the day, which was just covering what they would be learning in more depth than his earlier explanation. "You shouldn't say things like that and Naruto-kun," whispered Hinata. "I'm sorry, but he seems to hate me already," Naruto replied. Well, now you're just giving him a reason to," she said sternly. "All apologies during lunch," muttered Naruto. Few people in the world could get Mitarashi Naruto to do anything, and those few were Hinata, Tenten, and Anko. There were a few others that Naruto would occasionally listen to, like the Sandaime Hokage, Kurenai, Kenshin, Emi, the Ramen people, and Ibiki, but those were more because he liked them than anything. When the first 3 sounded disappointed or upset, it crushed him. They were his first friends and family, and they meant everything to him. "Gee, good. Naruto-kun, you can't afford to act like a jerk if you want people to see past your furry friend," she said in a much softer tone. "I know," he admitted. Hinata reached over and patted his arm to offer some comfort before the two turned their attention back to the Mon's lesson. Finally, at around 1 o'clock, Iruka called for a lunch break. Naruto and Hinata sighed in relief as they were given a short break from the torture. Iruka was obviously a very good teacher, but they had learned everything he was talking about from their families and friends years ago. Before Iruka could walk out the door, Naruto called out for him to wait. "Yes." Uruka asked shortly. I want to apologize for my behavior. I don't like it when people insult my Nei-chan, but you are the teacher, so I should have shown you some respect and I'm sorry, said Naruto. Uruka looked at the mini Anko in shock. He knew he had been into the kid and here he was apologizing for standing up for his family. Maybe I was wrong about him. Anko seems to have done a good job raising him aside from the whole sadistic thing. He thought before saying, I should apologize as well. I let my feelings for something else get in the way. Did you lose your family to Kyuubi? Asked Naruto sadly. Why yes, said Uruka weakly while he was shocked that the boy already knew about the demon. Anko Nei-chan told me about it when I was 6. I'm sorry for your loss, but I am not Kyuubi, Naruto said before walking out of the classroom with Hinata. Maybe I was very wrong, Uruka thought while making a mental note to see Anko about this as he left his classroom before disappearing. Naruto and Hinata were sitting comfortably under in the shade of a large tree while eating their lunches and talking when an arrogant-looking boy walked up with a few girls and boys following him. How did you do that jutsu? Demanded the boy. If you want to know, then study and find out for yourself. Naruto answered dismissively before turning back to Hinata, who seemed to be trying very hard not to laugh at the boy's outraged look. Do you know who I am? Shouted the boy angrily. No, and I don't really care either, Naruto replied while the boys snickered and the girls looked highly offended. I am Uchiha Sasuke, the boy said arrogantly, causing May of the girls to swoon. You could call yourself Booger, for all I care. I'm still not telling you, Naruto said while Hinata giggled into her hand. Now please leave. That's it. Fight me now, ordered the black-haired boy named Sasuke. Hinata-chan, asked Naruto. Go ahead, she said with a sigh. Naruto stood and brushed himself off before looking at the Uchiha. The boy had black hair and eyes, a pale complexion, and what seemed like a permanent scowl on his face. He wore a blue t-shirt with the Uchiha clan symbol on the back and a pair of black shorts and shoes. Fine, I'll fight you, he said calmly before he reached inside his coat to the sides of his legs and pulled out a pair of kunai. You say when? The boy never said when, he just growled and charged Naruto. Said boy sighed, put his kunai away and said in a lazy voice. Fukumikuchi Hari. Hidden mouth needles before he used his tongue to flip 2 needles from his mouth onto his lips. He then spat them at the charging boy, hitting him in the forehead causing him to stop. How dare you spit on Sasuke-kun? Shouted the pink-haired girl named Sakura and a blonde-haired girl who he later found out was named Ino. If you would pay attention you would notice the 2 needles sticking out of his forehead, said Naruto calmly, and as if on K, Sasuke froze. What did you do to me? He demanded through his clenched teeth. Those needles are hollow and hold a fast-acting poison in them that is released on contact. The poison freezes every joint in the body and lasts for up to 3 hours depending on a person's height, weight, and blood pressure, explained Naruto before he turned and walked back to Hinata. Sorry about that. It's okay, Hinata replied calmly as she and Naruto resumed eating their lunches. It was then that Naruto noticed a familiar tiny bottle. Damn it, Anko Nei-chan, he muttered. What is it, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked worriedly. Nei-chan put a bottle of sake in my lunch, he answered with a sigh. Hinata couldn't help but giggle at the wry look on Naruto's face. Does that really surprise you? She asked. No, not really, said Naruto, who then shrugged and took a drink from the bottle. Naruto-kun, shouted Hinata once she saw him drink from the bottle. Well, what else am I supposed to drink? He whined. Hinata tried her best to glare at him, but the effect was ruined as her lips betrayed her by curling upward. Fine, but don't drink too much, she said with a heavy sigh. Naruto, said a voice from behind them. Turning to see who had spoken, Naruto found Iruka standing there with a glaring Sakura and Ino while Sasuke was still frozen stiff. Yes, Iruka-sensei. Is something wrong? Asked Naruto innocently, which Hinata seemed to think was very funny because the poor girl snorted loudly as she tried to fight her laughter. Everyone stopped and looked at the now blushing girl as she ducked her head and tried wishing them all away. Iruka took pity on the girl and said, "Yes, something is wrong. You can't go around poisoning people." "Why not?" he asked. Iruka seemed so caught off guard by the simple question that it took him a few moments before he replied with, "Because it's wrong." They could all tell that Iruka didn't have a real reason, but out of respect for him and his position they went along with it. "The Uchiha demanded I fight him, so I did. I can't be held responsible for what happens to him during a fight he started," reasoned Naruto calmly. "Either way, I have to send you to the Hokage's office," said Iruka, who Naruto could tell didn't really want to do this. "Now?" Naruto asked. "Yes." Nodding his head, Naruto turned to Hinata and gave her a helpless shrug, which she returned, before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Naruto reappeared seconds later in the office of the Sandaime Hokage. "Aren't you supposed to be at the academy?" asked the elderly Hokage, who, to be quite honest, was happy for any reason to postpone doing any more paperwork. "Yeah, but Iruka-sensei sent me here after I got in a fight. Well, it wasn't really a fight so much as someone tried to start a fight with me and I poisoned them," explained Naruto as he sat down in the center chair across from the old man. The Hokage sighed before walking to his door and poking his head out before saying something to his secretary. Once this was done, he walked calmly back to his desk where he sat down and leaned back in his chair. A few moments later, a smiling Anko appeared in the office. Naruto groaned and said, "You called my Ne-chan." At this, the Sandaime couldn't help but smile as he motioned for Anko to sit. "Young Naruto here was involved in a almost fight at the academy," he said calmly. "What the hell is an almost fight? Asked Anko, who was looking at the Hokage as if he had finally become too old for his own good. "Naruto, please tell her what you told me," said the Hokage. "At lunch, Hinata-chan and I were eating peacefully when some arrogant mama's boy came up and demanded that I teach him the body flicker technique. I said no, so he then demanded that I fight him. I had two choices. A, beat him quickly and resume my pleasant lunch with Hinata-chan, or B, not fight him and listen to his whining for the rest of the lunch hour. Since I am here, I can imagine that you know which one I choose," explained Naruto eloquently. "Nice speech. How long were you working on it?" asked Anko with a smirk. "As soon as Iruka-sensei told me to come here," he admitted with a guilty smile. "So who did you beat and with what?" asked Anko. "Uchiha Sasuke, and with my mouth needles," said Naruto proudly. "Good job," cried Anko as she leaned over and hugged Naruto tightly before the Hokage cleared his throat. I mean, bad Naru-chan. That's a bad little fox," she chided jokingly. "I'm sorry," said Naruto in a mock apologetic tone. The Hokage just sighed and shook his head. "I should have known that you would be congratulated by Anko if you were sent here for fighting. Normal people would have gotten in trouble," he said lightly. "Not in our family," stated Anko with a bright smile. "Oh yeah, Ne-chan. Did you mean to give me a bottle of sake with my lunch?" asked Naruto calmly. "I didn't notice until you were gone, and by then I figured that you might want it," she answered sheepishly. "You gave your 8-year-old Tudo sake?" asked the Sandaime sternly. "Good job," Anko muttered under her breath to a now snickering Naruto. "And just where is this sake?" the Hokage asked Naruto, who was now squirming uncomfortably in his seat. "I drank it," he admitted. The Hokage tried to look stern but couldn't keep it up, so he sighed heavily and asked, "What am I going to do with the two of you?" "Nothing," offered the two. Anko, Go back to work. Naruto, go back to the academy and tell Iruka that you have been punished, he ordered calmly. The two looked at each other before nodding and disappearing. Each then reappeared in their respective places. In Naruto's case, he arrived startling many in the process. Sorry about that, he said sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his neck and offered them a small smile before he walked down to his seat beside Hinata. Everything taken care of? Iruka asked. Yeah, I got punished, Naruto said sadly. Iruka looked at him for a moment before snorting and turning back to his blackboard. Like I believe that, knowing Anko, she more than likely rewarded him. Although it was funny to see Sasuke stuck like that, thought Iruka as he wrote the next part of his lesson on the board. Are you okay, Naruto-kun? Asked Hinata softly. Hinata-chan, you know my Nei-chan. What kind of punishment would she give me for fighting? Asked Naruto with a very slight smile. She would most likely be started Hinata before her eyes went wide and she giggled. I knew you were quick, whispered Naruto. Hey, I have training with Anko Nei-chan after our class, but what do you say we try and find Tenten-chan after that? That sounds nice, agreed Hinata softly. Naruto smiled at her before sitting back, laying his feet on top of the desk, and closing his eyes while 4 sets of eyes saw this with very different reactions. Hinata saw this and smiled at her blonde friend. Iruka decided to let it slide this once because of what he had done to the arrogant Uchiha, and Ino and Sakura glared at him while each thinking the same thing. How dare he do that to my Sasuke-kun? Naruto himself only noticed Hinata's reaction, but to him that was the only one that mattered right then. A few hours later, a soft bell rang, signaling the end of the day. As Iruka tried to shout out assignments as the children ran from the room as fast as they could, Naruto and Hinata walked out calmly. So, should I come by and get you, or do you want to come over to my place first? Asked Naruto with a smirk while Hinata glared at him playfully. He knew full well that Hinata never went to his house by herself simply because it was in the middle of a place called the Forest of Death. That alone seemed to ward off visitors, but she was more than willing to walk through it with either him or Tenten, who didn't mind the forest at all. Of course, Naruto would almost always use the body flicker technique to get them there faster, even though Tenten would rant and rave for hours about how much fun they were missing. Hinata's view was that a day with limited encounters of things that could kill her was a good day. Come pick me you up, Naruto-kun, she stated. As you command, said Naruto with a mocking bow. Why you should act like this more often, joked the pearl-eyed girl. Naruto laughed and gave Hinata a playful shove before saying, you wish. Before long the two were in front of the Hyuga compound, and with a quick hug, Hinata ran inside with a happy smile on her face. Ignoring the glares the guards gave him, Naruto turned and ran off towards this home. Ever since Naruto had been taught the body flicker, Anko had stated that it was only to be used when he was running late, needed to get somewhere in a hurry, or just needed to get past the forest surrounding their apartment. Not wanting to be late for his new lessons, Naruto ran as fast as he could towards the gates. As he reached them, he never even slowed down, and as he was about to run into the gate, he suddenly disappeared. What Naruto forgot was the first rule Anko had taught him when he learned the technique, which was never use it while running, because if you do, you reappear running. Normally this isn't a problem if you were reappearing in a clearing or an open street, but Naruto was reappearing right in front of their door, and with a loud thud Naruto ran face first into the wooden door. As he bounced off the door and clutched his now bleeding nose, Naruto shouted, "Damn it all to he!" Before Anko opened the door. She looked down at her tuto with a sadistic smirk as she leaned against the door frame and listened to his string of swear words, all of which he learned from Anko early on in life. "You did it running, didn't you?" She asked as Naruto began wiping the blood from the now healed wound. Shut up, he shouted as he pushed by her only to find Kurenai and Ibiki sitting in their living room laughing. Perfect, he muttered as he walked into the kitchen to get a wet rag. So what was that about? Asked a gruff-sounding Morino Ibiki. If his voice sounded gruff, then there was no word to describe his looks. The man was truly a man of his trade, and in this case it wasn't a good thing. Ibiki was Konohagakure's top torture and interrogation specialist, and the man had scars all over his body and drill holes in his head from his own stays with enemy shinobi. This might have been what Anko liked about him, or it could have been that he himself was a sadist. Either way, Naruto found him to be a nice guy and fun to be around. I was excited about starting my new lessons. He shouted happily. New lessons? Asked Kurenai. This woman was the wild card, and for the life of him Naruto couldn't figure out how her and Anko were such good friends. Kurenai was a genjutsu mistress and an overall nice person. She cared about people and would help anyone. She was like a more confident, red-eyed Hinata. Whereas Anko was like he was. I guess that is the answer then. He thought with a mental laugh. He had never thought that Kurenai and Anko matched Hinata and himself so well. Yeah, Nei-chan is going to start teaching me advanced anatomy, advanced psychology, torture, and interrogation. He said happily as he began all but jumping up and down as excitement swelled inside him. Following the family trade are you? Asked Ibiki with a harsh laugh. Why wouldn't I? Asked Naruto calmly. Kurenai looked at Anko and said, leave it to you to adopt a cute blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy and turn him into a sadist by the time he turned 8. She then couldn't help but laugh as Naruto and Anko both gave the exact same look of outrage as they clutched their hearts. Never mind. You two deserve each other. Thank you. They chorused with bright smiles. You're both crazy, said Ibiki with a sad shake of his head. Who are you to call anyone crazy, Ibiki? Asked Naruto, who despite the highly offended tone was still smiling happily. Kurenai laughed and stated, he has you there, Scarhead. Ibiki gave a threatening growl which would have worked on anyone other than the three of them. They just let him growl while smiling patronizingly at him. Naru-chan, I'm going to have to postpone our lessons until tomorrow morning. I forgot that I made plans with these two. Anko said gently. Naruto sighed heavily before nodding and saying, that's okay, Nei-chan. You go out and have fun with your hoodlum friends, but I expect you home before 10 o'clock, young lady. Only 10, whined Anko jokingly. Fine, 10:30, but I expect you to clean your room tomorrow. Naruto said sternly. Deal, said Anko happily before both she and Naruto cracked up while Ibiki and Kurenai just looked relieved that they were joking. Well, I'm going to go get Hinata-chan before heading over to Tenten-chan, shouted Naruto before he grabbed his key and disappearing. Does he have any male friends? Asked Ibiki once Naruto had left. None, but after what he did to Uchiha Sasuke, I'd be surprised if he doesn't by the end of the week, she answered with a soft laugh. What did he do to that brat? Asked Kurenai. He poisoned him after the Uchiha demanded that he fight him. My little Naru-chan got sent to the Hokage's office on the first day, she said proudly as she wiped an imaginary tear from her eye. But knowing you, you're actually proud, muttered Ibiki. I heard that, shouted Anko. I still haven't heard you deny it, Kurenai pointed out. Anko smirked evilly before saying, fine, I'm proud of Naruto. Said boy sneezed loudly before stopping in front of the Hyuga guards. Hey, could you please tell Hinata-chan that I am here? He asked. You should not refer to Hinata-sama in such familiar terms, growled one of the guards while the other left to get Hinata. Why not? She and Tenten-chan are my best friends, Naruto stated loudly. Maybe now, But not for long, sneered the guard. Before Naruto could ask him what he meant, a very familiar girl ran out of the front door and right up to him. Naruto-kun. I wasn't expecting you so soon, she said happily. Well, Anko Ne-chan postponed our lessons until tomorrow morning because she forgot that she had made plans with Ibiki and Kurenai, he said with a sigh. Did why you tell her to be home by 10? Asked Hinata with a giggle as she led Naruto away from the guards and towards their other friend's house. No, she can stay out until 10:30, but she has to clean her room tomorrow, joked Naruto while Hinata's giggle turned into an outright laugh at the way Anko and Naruto behaved. I wish I had a Ne-san like Anko-senpai, Hinata said softly. Naruto gave her a sad look before wrapping an arm around her shoulder and giving her a comforting squeeze. Hinata had told him that as soon as her Ka-san had passed away, her Tu-san changed drastically. Her Tu-san no longer treated her like he had. He was now cold and condescending, as if he blamed Hinata for his wife's death. Hyuga Hitomi died, bringing Hinata's Imouto, Hanabi, now 2 years old, into the world. The only thing he did anymore that would be considered a nice was letting Hinata be friends with Naruto and Tenten, even when it caused him to go against the clan elders. Naruto was one of the few who saw this as him just not caring what she did, but it gave Hinata hope, so who was he to tell her any different? He'll come around, Hinata-chan, Naruto said gently. You just work hard and become someone your Ka-san would be proud of. Thank you, Naruto-kun, Hinata replied with a small smile. It's no problem, Hinata-chan, he said with a bright smile. Hinata simply returned the smile before the two continued their walk towards Tenten's house in silence. For some reason, the two of them were the only pairing out of the three that could just walk beside each other in silence and never have to say anything. When Naruto was with Tenten, it was always loud and they were always joking around, and when Tenten was with Hinata, she actually acted like a girl and gossiped. This was something Naruto could have lived without, but he learned to keep his mouth shut after he whined and made some comments one time and reserved multiple kunai and shuriken in his legs from Tenten. So Naruto learned early that even the most tomboyish girl was still a girl. Even though Tenten was a year older than them, she still spent most of her time with the two of them. This was the reason why Hinata was bored in their class. While Naruto had his apprenticeship with Anko, Hinata only had a Tu-san who would shout things at her. So Tenten took it upon herself to see that Hinata learned everything she had been taught, making Hinata a year ahead of everyone in her class, save Naruto. Also, with constant exposure to Tenten and Naruto, Hinata found it very hard to not shout thing all the time, but that just wouldn't be proper. As the two made it to their favorite weapons store, they heard the familiar sounds of Tenten training in her backyard. As the two walked into the store, they offered Emi, who was watching the store, a quick hello before walking through the home and out to the backyard. Stay here, Naruto whispered to Hinata with a smirk. You're going to scare her, aren't you? She asked nervously. Things like this never ended well, meaning that Naruto usually ended up looking like a pin cushion. Hinata only hoped that Tenten wasn't training with anything too dangerous. Walking out of the house slowly and as silently as he could, he made his way up to a panting Tenten as she leaned forward with her hands on her knees. Hello, Tenten-chan, Naruto yelled as loud as he could. He then laughed loudly as Tenten jumped about 5 feet in the air as she spun around to find Naruto laughing at her. With a feral growl, Tenten attacked the blonde demon vessel. You bastard! She shouted as she kicked him as hard as she could in the side while Ka-san and Hinata snickered at her from the doorway, and when Naruto seemed to ignore the kick, Tenten sat down on his chest and glared at him. Hello, said Naruto as he struggled to stop laughing while looking incredibly nervous. Tenten then gave a smirk that Anko would have been jealous of before saying, Eat dirt, eat wa. started Naruto before Tenten shoved a large clump of dirt into his mouth. With that, Naruto knocked Tenten off of him and began spitting up the dirt while Tenten, Hinata, and Emi all rolled on the ground as they laughed. "I can't believe you made me eat dirt," he yelled. "Why you ate dirt?" shouted Tenten between gasps of breath. "And here I brought Hinata-chan to visit you to tell you all about our first day and how do you repay me. You make me eat dirt," shouted Naruto before he sat down and pouted. "Well, you shouldn't have scared her, Naruto-kun," Hinata replied with only a slight giggle as she walked over to the two and sat beside Naruto. Tenten of course spent the next few minutes pointing and laughing at Naruto before she regained control over herself and sat up but with a wide smile that split her face in two. "So how was your first day?" she asked with one last giggle. It was boring you until Naruto-kun got sent to the Hokage's office for fighting." That was pretty funny," Hinata answered with a fond smile. "You got into a fight on the first day?" shouted Emi from the doorway. How proud was Anko? Very. You would have thought that I single-handedly took over the world by the way she was smiling. Naruto said happily. "So what did you do?" asked Tenten excitedly. From the constant exposure to Anko and Naruto, Tenten had learned to love a good fight. "Well, Hinata-chan and I were being perfect angels while eating our lunch." Emi and Tenten snorted loudly at this part. When all of a sudden that arrogant bastard Uchiha Sasuke walked up and demanded that I teach him the body flicker. I said no, mocked him a little, so he demanded that I fight him. As he charged me, I noticed that his taijutsu was academy standard at best, so I poisoned him quickly and went back my lunch with Hinata-chan, explained Naruto. Then two of Uchiha-san's fangirls told on him and he got sent to the Hokage's office, added Hinata while her eyes narrowed a bit at this but quickly softened to their usual doe-eyed appearance. "You poisoned him?" shouted Tenten, who sounded upset and awed by the fact. "Yes," said Naruto nervously. "He really didn't want to eat any more dirt. Aw man, I wish I could have seen that," she whined while Hinata and Emi sweat dropped while Naruto sighed in relief. "There wasn't much to see. I used my hidden needles to freeze him for a few hours." Although it was funny to hear all of his fangirls yell at me for spitting on their Sasuke-kun, Naruto said while copying their shrill voice perfectly. "They never even noticed your needles or the fact that you said, hidden mouth needles?" asked Tenten in disbelief. She knew that Naruto was better than her, and after they both started training with Hinata that even she was almost as good as she was, but even at the age of 6 she had noticed Naruto's needles. Hinata started noticing them last year because that was when she was first hit by them and they were always the ones with the weakest poison he had. Nothing good would come from paralyzing your sparring partner for hours on end. "Honey, they are only 8 years old and a lot of them haven't had any form of training yet," Emi said to her daughter. "Whatever," muttered Tenten. Tenten was the kind of person who hated being judged by the fact she was female. She firmly believed that the fact that she was a girl had nothing to do with what kind of shinobi she was, and one of the things that would set her off was snobby little fan girls who wanted to do their hair more than train. They gave every kunoichi a bad name and only furthered the stereotype that women had no business being shinobi. This was one of the reasons Tenten had no female friends her own age and why she hung out with Naruto and Hinata. Naruto, after being raised by Anko, believed that woman made very good shinobi. If he had believed any different, then Anko and Kurenai would have probably killed him. Hinata, being female, believed like Tenten but also thought ahead a little more. While Tenten simply hated them for furthering a stereotype, Hinata thought ahead to possible missions and knew that if they were a weak link then they would most likely die and possibly take their teammates with them. So as a rule, when they trained with each other they held nothing back. "Tenten-chan, You should wait a little while to see what kind of kunoichi they are going to be before you start hating them. You never know, they may turn out to be very good shinobi, offered Naruto weakly. He said this more to appease Tenten than anything. Personally, he didn't see them changing but gave them the benefit of the doubt. You don't even believe that? Shouted Tenten as she glared at Naruto. I isn't judging someone you don't know. What you hate, Tenten-chan? Asked Hinata softly. Tenten sulked a little and muttered. Yes. Then you should give them a chance. Besides, it was only the first day. Emmy said as she stood, brushed herself off, and walked back into the house to watch the store she had left unattended. So what are you two up to? Asked Tenten. Out on a date. What? Shouted Naruto. We're only 8 years old. Besides, Naruto-kun is like a Nii-san, older brother, to me. Stated Hinata while Tenten turned her head to hide the relived look on her face from Naruto, but Hinata saw it and smiled slightly. In Konohagakure it was common for younger children to find someone at a young age, even if nothing happened until they were teenagers. It was the price people paid for living in a shinobi village. Most people die at a very young age, so children tend to grow up much faster than they normally would, mentally that is. Yeah, Hinata-chan is the annoying Imouto, younger sister, I never had. Shouted Naruto. Hinata clearly didn't find this funny. Why, you are only 2 months older than I am. 2 months is still 2 months. He said mockingly. Do you want to eat dirt again? She threatened. This shut Naruto up so fast that the two girls couldn't help but laugh at the blonde boy. That's not fair, Naruto said with pout. Well, how about we train for a little bit? That should take your mind off of the big bad dirt. Joked Tenten. Naruto chose to ignore the dirt comment but stood up and got ready to train nonetheless. So what are we going to do today? He asked. Well, since Hinata-chan and I haven't seen your taijutsu stance because you're a stingy bastard. How about taijutsu spars? Asked Tenten. Naruto debated this in his mind for a few moments before he sighed and said. Fine. At least now I can get you back for that dirt. Then you two can go first. Hinata said softly as she moved to the side of the yard so that the two had more room to move around. Since Tenten only ever used weapons, she only ever learned the basic academy taijutsu style, but from working with Anko she was very good at it. Naruto on the other hand used a style that only 3 people in the world knew, himself included. He moved into his stance which looked very off balance to Tenten and Hinata. All his weight was on his right foot as he placed his left foot lightly on the ground in front of him. His left arm was held loosely out in front of him and his right was bent along his waist. Both hands were balled into fists except for his index and middle fingers, which were held straight out. Normally he would have chakra encasing then, but in a friendly spar there was no need. Without chakra he could only poke the girls really hard, but if he had channeled chakra then his fingers would have cut through their skin and organs like a hot knife through butter. What is that? Asked Tenten as she looked at his off-balance stance in confusion. This is Buyu no Za Suen Habi, or Dance of the Twin Snakes. Normally I would have my fingers surrounded with chakra, but that would mean that if I hit you then it could kill you and you're much too cute to kill. Explained Naruto with a bright smile. Whatever. Said Tenten, but she couldn't stop her cheeks from turning pink. Hinata watched the two stare at each other while trying to force the other to make the next move. She knew that Naruto never made the first move because he didn't mind waiting, and also that it messed with his opponent when he stood there smiling. He was truly a sadist. He loved messing with people's minds to the point where they snapped and made a stupid move, then it would be his turn. Tenten also knew all about Naruto's tendencies and decided that if she was going to have to attack then it should be on her terms and not because she lost it. She had lost too many fights to the blonde boy that way. So with impressive speed she ran towards Naruto while completely composed. She never really thought about the reason that his stance was so off balance and that cost her. As she charged him, Naruto's left foot shot into the air with amazing speed. As his foot connected with Tenten's jaw, he shifted onto his left foot with his right in front. Tenten was knocked so hard by the kick that she flew a few feet back before landing on the ground with a hard thud. She then laid there staring at the sky as she tried to work out what the hell had just happened. She then gave a light laugh as she lifted herself off of the ground and wiped the blood from her chin. "Well, that explains the stance," she said with a smirk. One of the things Naruto loved about sparring with Tenten and Hinata was the fact that when they got hit they learned from it and came right back at you. They were a lot like Anko in that respect. On the very few times Naruto had managed to even hit Anko, she would compliment him and come at him harder than ever. This made for an